Today we're talking about the tenancies, the different ways in which real estate can be owned. Now, if you saw my teaser video in this one, I gave you a sort of quick and dirty framework of how you can think about these, an easy way to remember them. In this video, we're going to be going into more detail on each one. Sole ownership, tenants by the entirety, joint tenants, and tenants in common. Here we go. First up is sole ownership. This one's probably the easiest to understand. It means that there's no relationship between the owner and other owners because there are no other owners. They're just one. That one can be a person, it can be a company, it can be an estate, it could even be something else. But whatever it is, there's only one of them. That's sole ownership. Tenancy by the entirety. It's not required that a married couple hold property as tenants by the entirety. But in most circumstances, most married couples choose to own real estate as tenants by the entirety. The tenancy has three key features to it. The first two are probably obvious, the third not so much. Let's talk about each. The first is that we're talking about an equal partnership here. It would not be permissible for a married couple to buy a piece of real estate as 60-40 partners and hold it as tenants by the entirety. If they want to hold as tenants by the entirety, they have to be equal partners. Second feature, rights of survivorship. When one spouse passes away, goodbye, the other one is left as the sole owner of the property. The third feature is protection against individual creditors. This one's unusual and might require some context, so let's back up. When a judgment is entered against an individual in court, there was a lawsuit, the person didn't pay some debts owed, and there's a judgment against them saying that they owe a company a certain amount of money. Normally what happens is that as soon as that judgment is entered, as soon as the judge's gavel falls, that judgment attaches as a lien to any real estate that the debtor has. So when a judgment is entered, that debt attaches as a lien to the real estate that the debtor owns in the county. And that debt has to be paid just like a mortgage has to be paid at settlement or something else. In the case of tenants by the entirety, there's an additional layer of protection. Because the house is owned by the married couple as a unit, if one member of the married couple has a judgment entered against them, it does not attach to the property. The thinking is this: the property is not owned by the individual. The property is owned by the unit, the couple. And so in order for any judgment to attach to the property, the judgment must be against both members of the couple. That's the advantage of tenants by the entirety. Joint tenants. What do we know about them? Well, a few things. Joint tenants are equal partners when they own real estate. If there are two people that hold property as joint tenants, they're 50-50 partners. If there are three people that hold a piece of real estate as joint tenants, they each own a third. If there are four people, they each own 25%. You see how the pattern goes here. Joint tenants are equal partners by definition. Two people may not buy property as joint tenants and own it as 60-40 partners. Joint tenants by definition are equal partners regardless of how many of them there are. Second feature of joint tenancy is rights of survivorship. So when two people buy property as joint tenants, if one of them passes away, the other is left as the sole owner. If three people buy property together as joint tenants and one passes away, the other two are left as the 50-50 joint tenants. That's the benefit of joint tenancy. Tenants in common is the most flexible form of real estate because the partners need not be equal partners. They can divide the ownership interest among them any way that they want. And here's what I mean. Two people can buy property and hold it as tenants in common and be 50-50 partners if they want. Or they can decide to be 60-40 partners, 70-30 partners. I even once saw an instance where 99% of the ownership was vested in one person's name and 1% in the other person's name. So the unequal distribution of ownership can occur not just if there are two owners, but if there are three or more. You can have three owners that own the property as 50-40-10, adding up to 100, 40-30-30, adding up to 100. As long as the ownership interests all add up to 100, you can split them among the owners in any way that you want. Here's the other key feature of tenants in common. It's that the owners of the property, regardless of how many of them there are, do not enjoy rights of survivorship. So when one owner passes away, let's take an example real quick. A property is owned by two tenants in common, A and B. When B passes away, the property then becomes owned 50% by A and 50% by the estate of B. The important thing here is that when it's owned as tenants in common, the surviving owner does not take ownership as they would if the property were owned by joint tenants or tenants by the entirety. So tenants in common is the most flexible form because the owners can divide up the ownership any way they want. They do not enjoy rights of survivorship. And tenants in common is the default setting. Unless a deed specifically states that a property is going to be owned as joint tenants or as tenants by the entirety, the default assumption is that this property is owned as tenants in common. And those are the different options for how real estate can be owned. I hope in this video I gave you enough detail about each one so that you could make a decision and decide which one is best for you. As always, if you have questions, please let me know.